Stop whatever you're doing right now. 6 hours that created the most famous phrase of the American Civil War and transformed Grant into a terror for the Confederates. February 16th, 1862. 6 in the morning. A general is writing 2 words that would change the war forever. You know that moment at work when your boss asks you if you can deliver an impossible project and you say, "No problem?" Grant had just done that, but to 15,000 Confederate soldiers. This really happened, and Bruce Catton discovered by analyzing original military correspondence that these specific 6 hours not only saved Grant's career, they created the myth of the ruthless general who would terrorize the South for the rest of the war. In 6 hours, Grant turned what was supposed to be a military negotiation into the most humiliating surrender in Confederate history up to that point. With just 2 words: unconditional surrender. We're talking about Fort Donelson, the fortress that protected Nashville and all of central Tennessee. The Confederates had 15,000 entrenched soldiers, positioned cannons, and were 100% confident that Grant would retreat. Look at this. On the morning of the 16th, the Confederates had just broken the Union lines and were fleeing in large numbers. But wait. 6 hours earlier, Grant was receiving reports that his own generals wanted to surrender. 6 hours later, he was dictating the harshest surrender terms a U.S. general had ever imposed. What the hell happened in those 6 hours that transformed Grant from a panicked commander into the general who invented total war? Stick around, because you're going to discover how Bruce Catton documented the exact moment the legend of Ulysses S. Grant was born. It was the historian Bruce Catton who discovered, through military telegrams and officers' diaries, how impregnable Fort Donelson was considered. February 1862. Grant had just captured Fort Henry, but that had been easy compared to the challenge ahead. Fort Donelson controlled the Cumberland River, the gateway to Nashville, the capital of Tennessee. If the Confederates held Donelson, the Union could never advance into the heart of the South. The fortress had 15,000 Confederate soldiers commanded by 3 experienced generals: John Floyd, Gideon Pillow, and Simon Buckner. And now comes the insane part. Grant only had 17,000 soldiers, but half were protecting their own supply lines. The Confederates knew this. They were 100% confident that Grant would attempt a long siege, giving time for reinforcements to arrive from Nashville. But Bruce Catton documented that Grant had other plans. He decided to attack the fortress directly. No siege, no waiting for reinforcements, no defensive strategy. It was considered military suicide at the time. February 15th, 1862. 6 in the morning. Grant had positioned his troops in a semicircle around Fort Donelson. The plan was simple: coordinated attacks from 3 different directions. But then everything went wrong. Listen to this. The Confederates did something no one expected. Instead of defending, they attacked first. At 6:30 a.m., 10,000 Confederates came out of the fortress and completely broke the Union's right flank. Bruce Catton documented that General John McClernand, commanding the right flank, sent desperate messengers to Grant. "We are being massacred. I need reinforcements immediately." But here comes the worst part. Grant wasn't even on the battlefield. He had left that morning to meet Commodore Andrew Foote, the naval squadron commander, 12 kilometers away. Grant was literally discussing naval strategy while his own battle was being lost. When Grant returned at 1 p.m., the situation was in total chaos. The Union's right flank was completely broken. Thousands of soldiers were in retreat, and the Confederates were controlling the escape route to Nashville. His own generals were suggesting a general retreat, and now comes the part that changed everything. February 15th, 1 p.m. to 7:09 p.m., the 6 most important hours of Grant's career. As Bruce Catton documented through direct testimonies, Grant arrived in the midst of the greatest chaos the Union had seen in the Western theater. Fleeing soldiers, panicked commanders, destroyed defensive lines. And then Grant did something no military manual of the time taught. Instead of worrying about a retreat, he analyzed the situation for exactly 15 minutes and came to a revolutionary conclusion. If the Confederates are attacking to escape, it's because they are desperate. While his generals saw defeat, Grant saw opportunity. At 1:30 p.m., Grant gave the most daring order of his career up to that point. The enemy has tried to escape. That means they are defeated. Attack the whole line. His own officers thought he had gone insane, but Grant had seen something everyone else missed. The Confederates who attacked that morning were exhausted after 7 hours of intense combat. At 2:00 p.m., Grant ordered a simultaneous counterattack on 3 fronts. It was something never attempted before in the Civil War. And now comes the epic part. The counterattack worked perfectly. In 3 hours, the Union troops regained all the positions lost that morning. At 5:00 p.m., the Confederates were back in the trenches of Fort Donelson, but now completely surrounded. The night of February 15th to 16th, the longest night. Bruce Catton discovered through the memoirs of the Confederate generals themselves that during the night something unprecedented in military history happened. The 3 Confederate commanders abandoned their soldiers. Floyd, Pillow, and Buckner, the 3 generals, spent the night arguing among themselves about who would be responsible for the surrender. John Floyd, the Supreme Commander, fled by boat during the night with his troops from Virginia. Gideon Pillow, second in command, fled by canoe across the Cumberland River. Simon Buckner was left holding the bag. 15,000 soldiers with no leadership, no supplies, and no ammunition. And Bruce Catton documented something even more incredible. During that same night, Grant was sleeping peacefully in his tent. He was so confident in victory that he told his aide, "Tomorrow they will surrender." Grant was betting everything on the psychology of the enemy. February 16th, 1862, 6:01 in the morning. Buckner sent an officer with a white flag to Grant's tent. The message was simple, a request to negotiate surrender terms. Now comes the moment that Bruce Catton considered the birth of the legendary Grant. At the time, military surrenders were always negotiated. Generals would meet, discuss honorable terms, and allow officers to keep their swords. But Grant broke all the rules. He took out paper and a pen and wrote the most famous response of the Civil War. "Sir, yours of this date proposing armistice and appointment of commissioners to settle terms of capitulation is just received. No terms except an unconditional and immediate surrender can be accepted. I propose to move immediately upon your works." 2 words, unconditional surrender. It was something unprecedented in American military tradition. Buckner was furious and replied, "The unequal and ungenerous terms you propose leave me no choice." But he surrendered anyway with 15,000 soldiers. In 6 hours, Grant had captured an impregnable fortress, taken 15,000 prisoners, created the phrase that would define his career, opened the path to Nashville. And do you know what happened next? The northern newspapers went wild. Grant became a national hero overnight. Unconditional Surrender Grant, the nickname that would terrorize the South for the next 3 years. What Bruce Catton discovered was that these 6 hours revealed Grant's true genius as a military commander. It wasn't his tactical or strategic ability. It was his psychological capacity to read the enemy better than the enemy knew themselves. When everyone else saw Confederate soldiers attacking, Grant saw Confederate soldiers desperate to flee. When everyone else saw a strong fortress defending, Grant saw a fortress with leadership in a panic. In 6 hours, Grant learned that war is psychology, and he had just discovered he was a master at it. If this story impressed you, leave a like. It helps the channel grow. And tell me, what decisive moment in Grant's life do you want me to cover in the next video? Always remember, sometimes 6 hours are enough to not only change your life, but to create a legend that lasts forever.